As part of the 2011 Light Reading TDM Replacement Industry Initiative, we're talking today to Heavy Reading Senior Analyst Jim Hodges about the key issues that carriers face in moving their TDM networks to IP technology. So Jim, with IP networks being the norm, why would carriers want to hold on to their TDM networks?
I think there's a couple of different reasons. I think the first is that they've had these networks deployed for many years and they've generated really good revenues for them. They've been very stable, and even today, these switches are decades old, but they still meet the performance requirements for industry. So they've been very durable. And the other part of that, I think, is that as they look to the future, they realize that these switches still have some life in them in terms of being able to provide some voice revenue, even though the voice revenues are declining. So if you've got a switch that's working, providing voice revenues even in a declining market, in some markets they may think it makes sense to keep that on TDM as opposed to trying to migrate it to voice over IP, even though they know that's the end game.
Is there any cost or service benefit in retaining TDM in the access?
That's a big issue. One of the things that, as I said, the TDM switches are pretty reliable and dependable, but they're connected by what we call inter-machine trunks, which are, again, sort of trunking point-to-point trunking facilities. So one of the things that operators have to think about is in the past, these were the only options. You had to connect these switches for reliability purposes. But as you look at the cost of these and maintaining these and the routing and just the maintenance of them, that does become a cost that they have to consider. And the other part of that is the skill set. Telcos today are obviously moving to IP services. They realize that's the future. So they don't want to keep training people on access that's that old and using machine trunks like that.
So Jim, what sort of power-saving benefits can be realized with the switch to IP?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. If you ask the operators, they'll give you different numbers based on what the power consumption is of their existing products compared to the solutions they're moving to. But we talked to a number of operators, and the savings seem to be almost like a 60% reduction sort of from the day one. If you replace sort of your 12 frames of TDM equipment with one frame of a next generation IP solution that's got the newest chipsets, newest software, there's really about at least a 60% savings reduction. And I think that's only kind of really a benchmark level. If you think about what we're doing in the future with smart grids, kind of moving towards peak performance, where we pay for power based on peak hours, I think the savings are even more significant.
Now, can you talk about the similarities and differences concerning maintenance when you look at TDM networks and IP networks?
Obviously any network has really sort of maintenance requirements and maintenance routines. I think one of the sort of the most outwardly visible signs or changes that operators are seeing today is that with TDM networks today, in the past where they've got things like maintenance spares and support, they were able to get that from the primary vendor when they bought the switches. But as they move forward and these vendors are now moving towards IP solutions, there's less support, so they have to do things like try and source spares, maintenance spares from third parties, and they have to get third-party consultants to help them with consulting for maybe software solutions. So even though they're not really taking a lot of new software releases, they may still have limited software support from their primary vendor, so they have to go to sort of a second party or a second market type of solution. And for maintenance spares, that's worked actually pretty well, but it's obviously a finite set of how many times you can keep reusing refurbished parts for your equipment.
With video being the primary traffic driver for next generation network traffic, what are the key issues facing OTT providers in this transition from TDM to IP?
That's a key question. Again, operators realize that video and data is the way that they're going to make all their revenue in the future. So today they're really essentially running two networks in kind of a hybrid mode. They might be using their TDM equipment for voice services, and they've got an IP network that they're using for basically video services or next generation services. But I think even the operators realize that that's not really an optimal strategy going forward. What you really want to do is move all those operators, all those customers over to your single network, really to drive service innovation so you can combine the services. Because really you can support legacy voice services on IP networks. There are ways to do that. So by having all the services, even legacy and next generation services really supported on one network, it really helps the operators basically be able to compete more effectively with over-the-top providers who really have a single network from day one.
Jim, is there any possibility for TDM growth, or is it just time to move on?
Well, certainly for fixed networks. There's about 1.1 billion lines out there, and for those fixed networks, it really is time to move on. There's really no opportunity because there's not a lot of growth. It's a little bit different for mobile. I mean, if you look at some of the mobile networks, even 2G networks in some of the emerging markets, there is some growth. So there might be some more opportunity to deploy 2G MSCs. But in most cases, obviously we're seeing even the 2G subscribers moving to HSPA, and clearly we're just on the verge of 4G LTE deployments. And with 4G LTE, the preferred approach in the industry is to use voice over LTE, which is VoIP carried over an LTE network. So clearly when you start doing that as well, there's really very limited opportunity for even mobile operators as well as they start moving subscribers to 3G and into 4G in the future.
So Jim, with all the drivers that we discussed, are we making real progress in replacing our fixed TDM switches?
Let me talk about the fixed one. Yeah, the fixed line is interesting. As I said, there's about 1.1 billion lines today, and we track these lines very closely every quarter, and about at the end of 2010, of these 1.1 billion lines, only 16%, if you can believe it globally, were basically using VoIP. All the rest is still TDM, so there's still a lot of TDM out there. But between 2011 and 2015, in a lot of markets, specifically in the United States and North America and in Western Europe, there's going to be a really aggressive shift as operators start to realize that they want to be able to harmonize their networks, as we just talked about. So for example, by 2015 in the United States, there's going to be about 64% of all the lines will be basically using voice over IP for fixed networks, and it's somewhere in the 59% range for Western Europe. So again, those markets are aggressively moving towards VoIP for their fixed networks.
Jim, thanks so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you.